AMD's brand new mid-range GPUs are finally here, the 7700 and 7800 XT. And to find out just how well they stack up, in this video I'll be assembling an awesome $1,200 build with the cheaper 7700 XT, diving into all the nitty-gritty from specs to performance, and comparing this thing against all of the relevant competition from both Nvidia and AMD. I'll also of course be covering off the best parts to pair up with a card like this, so without any further ado, let's dive into it. I know some of you are just tuning in for the benchmarks, and that's fine. Head to the timestamp on your screen now to skip to those. But for others, let me talk through what the 7700 and 7800 XT are all about, and where they sit in this kind of confusing market of GPUs right now. AMD have released two new cards. This 7700 XT with the cheaper MSRP of $449, and a more pricey 7800 XT with an MSRP of $499. Now these prices are incredibly competitive when you consider where AMD are aiming these GPUs. The higher end, more expensive 7800 XT is targeted at the Nvidia RTX 4070, a card that costs $100 more for the more basic models. The 7700 XT then is more aimed kind of at the 4060 Ti, but the more expensive 16GB variant, given it has 12GB of VRAM rather than the measly 8GB on entry-level GPUs like the 4060 Ti 8GB, making it a better card at 1440p. And in all of the materials AMD have sent us, my word, they are aiming these cards at 1440p. I don't know how many times they mentioned that in their deck, but it was many, hence the 12 and 16GB of VRAM on each model respectively. As far as specifications go, the 7700 XT has 54 compute units, while the 7800 XT has 60, so about a 10% difference there. RT accelerators are exactly the same, 54 and 60 on these cards. AI accelerators are also pretty similar, while the 7700 XT actually has a higher boost clock than the 7800 XT. Both cards come equipped with GDDR6 memory, 12 gigs on the 7700 XT and 16 gigs on the 7800 XT. We like that. With similar power consumption between the two cards as well. 245 watts on the 7700 XT, while you get 263 watts on the 7800 XT. As far as the memory bus goes, you've got a 192-bit bus on the 7700 XT and a 256-bit bus on the 7800 XT. The memory bus is really important as it defines how much bandwidth you have to the memory. That was one of the massive problems on the 4060 and 4060 Ti. They use such a small memory bus that there's just not the bandwidth, hence the whole 8GB palaver. But I want to go back to pricing for a minute, because what AMD have done here is insane. Where Nvidia are making obviously so much money on their mad AI GPUs, as we saw in their recent earnings call, and fair play to them, they're obviously not that bothered about reducing their margin on gaming cards, whereas AMD have come out with fists out and ready for a fight. Now, we aren't sure yet how many board partners will hit the MSRP, but if any recent AMD launches are anything to go by, probably most of them, because AMD tend to be competitive on price. The cheapest 4060 Ti's on the market are still more expensive than the 7700 XT, and without ruining the conclusions for later, this thing bulldozes a 4060 Ti, and if anything is more of a 4070 competitor. And the same goes for the 7800 XT. It goes head to head with the 4070, a card that costs $100 more at MSRP, and of course not everybody is hitting that price point. Now, in months gone by, Nvidia would have gone, yes, but we've got DLSS 3 with frame generation, AMD haven't got that. Now they have. It's not called frame generation, but they have announced FSR 3.0, which includes their fluid motion frames technology. Now, fluid motion frames basically is the Nvidia frame generation alternative, whereby it uses AI and machine learning to interpolate frames between rendered frames. It basically takes two frames that it's already rendered and goes kind of what's the midpoint and adds one in the middle, basically meaning Nvidia's advantage with DLSS 3 is diminishing. Now then, let's unpack this card and then take a look at the performance of the 7700 XT and of course the 7800 XT. This particular design is the Sapphire Pulse Edition. First impressions, doesn't look too large, that's what we like to see. Oh, look at that. Isn't that a good sized GPU? So dual 8-pin power connections on this card. You've got the Sapphire Pulse design, we've got the red Pulse on the backplate as you might expect. Bit of a Sapphire logo and branding. Red on the front kind of ties in with the Radeon theme. Isn't going to be for everybody, but you know what? I quite like it. And not only does it look the part, it also performs pretty well too, as we saw in all of our extensive testing. I'll link original copies of all the graphs at our web review down below. But let me start off with the esports titles and work through to the AAAs. As always, navigate using the timestamps to skip from game to game. Starting off with Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 at 1440p high settings. Where available, I've enabled DLSS and FSR in all titles for Nvidia and AMD cards respectively, and used the quality preset. The 7700 XT delivered 148 frames per second here. That was really impressive considering it was 11 FPS higher than the 4070. The card this GPU kind of competes with, though it's more priced like a 4060 Ti. A GPU it rather unsurprisingly knocks out of the park. But not only that, it also beats out the 4070 Ti, a GPU that costs considerably more, showing the 7700 XT punching far above its weight. All of my graphs will also include the 7800 XT, highlighted in purple for your reference. In Call of Duty's Warzone 2 at 1080p high settings with those DLSS and FSR settings once again enabled, the 7700 XT beats out AMD's 6800 from last generation and the RTX 4070. It falls slightly short to the 4070 Ti, as is absolutely to be expected given the price point differences, though this was a card beat out fairly comfortably by the 7800 XT. Tune up to 1440p high and the 7700 XT again shows itself to be pretty good. Results here of 137 FPS on average. This is higher than the 3070 Ti, 4070 and both the 6800 and 6800 XT from last generation. Move through into Apex Legends and both new cards have a really solid showing. We see some kind of weird results in Apex, but we thought we'd show them at 1080p regardless. The 7700 XT bringing home 209 FPS on average, and the 7800 XT a considerable increase with 279. Move up to 1440p and the numbers start to normalize a bit more in the region of where we'd expect, and our volatile results swing against favour of AMD in this title, with the 7700 XT not quite catching up with the 4070 in this instance. Now, to be clear, the 4070 retails for just under $600. AMD say this card has an MSRP of just $450. We shouldn't expect to see this card beat out the 4070. In fact, for it to be anywhere near is an admission of how strong the performance is. With that in mind, the results were still very good. It beat out the 4060 Ti, the 4060, 3070 Ti. There are zero complaints from me. At 4K high settings, again we see similar results. It does struggle a little bit more here with 111 FPS on average. It's stronger than the 4060 Ti, which is obviously good, but doesn't quite catch up with the likes of the 3080 or the 4070. Move through into Hogwarts Legacy, another one of our AAA titles, and at 1080p high settings, again the results are really strong. 111 on average for the 7700 XT, that's 6 frames per second more than the 4070, and 11 frames per second more than the 60 Ti, while the 7800 XT has a good showing, beating out not only the 4070 but 4070 Ti too. I know this build is about the 7700 XT, but if you've got an extra $50 to spend, boy is the 7800 XT an upgrade. Hogwarts Legacy at 1440p high, the 7700 XT pulled in 92 FPS, more than the 4070, less than the 4070 Ti. You can see a pattern starting to emerge here, with the 7800 XT only falling short to the 7900 XT, a $900 GPU, and of course Nvidia's 4080. Move through into Fortnite at 1080p competitive settings, because, you know, why not? And the 7700 XT again stacks up well, beating out the 4070, 4060 Ti, 6750 XT, you name it, this card really did well. It obviously falls short to last gen's 6900 XT, something to be expected, but not by a huge margin, and really holds up nicely. Move through into F1 2022, we will be revisiting these numbers and upgrading them to 23, but in the interest of giving you guys as much data as possible, the 7700 XT again beat out the 4070, only marginally, but it's a win nevertheless. The 7800 XT beat out the 4070 Ti and 3080, falling short only to the 4080 in our testing. Move through into Overwatch 2 at 1080p Ultra, and the 7700 XT pulled in an average of 303 frames per second. In this instance, it didn't surpass the 4070, but it did surpass the 4060 Ti. The 7800 XT does beat the 4070 more comfortably though, showing again the advantage of that $50 upgrade. Remember, spending an extra $50 to get the 7800 XT will still cost you $100 less than buying the 4070, at least in current market MSRP pricing. Latest price and availability will as always be linked below. To round things off, we also tested out Starfield. Forgive us for a lack of numbers. We used the day one patch which came out today, that's Wednesday the 6th of September, and frantically tried to get the most up-to-date present numbers we can with those latest optimizations. The 7700 XT beat out the 4060 Ti but fell short to the 4070, while the 7800 XT beat out the 4070 and 4070 Ti. Check out the link to our review of this card down below, where we'll be updating the Starfield numbers as soon as we can. All in all, the 7700 XT provided a mightily impressive set of results, and there is no doubt in my mind that it fills a gap at this $450 MSRP price point that no other card on the market can satisfy. AMD have done a good job here as long as this card remains available for the advertised MSRP. So with performance aside, you probably want to know, James, if I'm going to build a system with a card like this, what parts should I go for? So let's finally build a gaming PC. I'm feeling so good about these cards. It's good to have price competitive GPUs back in the market, and people voting with their feet and refusing to pay inflated prices for GPUs. I'm not being funny. It's obviously worked, and if you want a good value card, now is the time to buy. Anyway, I digress. Now, with this being an AMD build, how can I pick up anything other than a Ryzen 7600X? This 6-core 12-thread chip is an awesome pickup, and not only does it fit with the whole AMD theme, but it is the best value mid-range gaming CPU you can buy right now. The reason I say that, you've got good multi-thread, good single thread, and often can be found for just over $200 US. Latest pricing and availability will be linked below as always. Plus, the advantage you get with AMD, and I know this is sounding like a James loves AMD video, is that on the CPU side, you can buy a motherboard like this, the Gigabyte B650 Gaming X8X, for, at the time of filming, under $200 US, get RAM overclocking, CPU overclocking, DDR5, good connectivity. I mean, just look at that I/O. Wi-Fi 6, USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type A and Type C, BIOS flashback, 2.5 gig Ethernet, and then 2 standard USB 3.2 ports. It really is amazing what you can actually assemble. One of my biggest criticisms of Ryzen 7000 when it first came out, that was bad, was how expensive some of the motherboards were. They were like $500–600, but now you can pick up a board like this for under $200. And if you're not bothered about overclocking, some of the new A620 chipset boards, like the ASRock design we recently looked at, come in at just over $100 and have things like Wi-Fi. You might not get Wi-Fi 6, but you'll still get Wi-Fi connectivity nonetheless, DDR5 support, you get the gist. Talking of DDR5, I have of course picked up a 32 gig kit for this AMD build, Corsair's Vengeance RGB. You want to go for two 16GB DIMMs in a system like this. That's going to give you dual channel memory, add into that memory bandwidth, kind of like what we talked about with the GPU memory bus a little bit earlier. It's no good having plenty of fast memory and not having the bandwidth to use it. As far as RAM or memory goes, for a gaming PC nowadays, you need 32 gigs unless you're going for a very entry-level 1080p system. While I'm here, I'm also going to add in the storage, and I have picked up this, which is the WD Black SN850X. Now, this is the 2TB model. In order to stay within the $1,200 budget, if I'm being really transparent, you're going to have to drop down to the 1TB, and I'll link that below. But keep an eye on the deals page on GeekaWhat.com, as very often the 2TB version does drop to under $100, which is kind of crazy. Bearing in mind, of course, this drive's going to give you what, 5, 6, even 7 gigabytes of speed on your read and write, depending on what it is you're reading and writing. Really, really rapid, really quick drive, and an awesome shout for a system like this one. The last part to pop onto the motherboard before looking at the case and stuff is going to be the CPU cooler. Now, I've picked up this DeepCool AK400 Zero Dark Plus. The reason I've gone for this kind of cooler is because for just over $40, it is really, really adequate. It's going to allow us to overclock the CPU a little bit, but the motherboard isn't necessarily an enthusiast grade design anyway. Plus, it's also going to be pretty quiet. These DeepCool fans are really quite nice. It just ticks a lot of boxes and does so in a way that isn't overly flashy, doesn't shout about it, but will keep the CPU nice and cool. Now, inside the box, you get a bag of mounting hardware, and the way that this cooler installs is actually really clever. So DeepCool include this universal mounting plate. This mounts to the motherboard using some stoppers and some screws, and the included motherboard backplate, and provides 2 screw threads to pop the cooler on. It's the same mounting plate you use for an Intel build, helping to keep things really universal. Then once the bracket's in, it's a simple case of adding some thermal paste and the cooler. The screws are already pre-mounted, so just tighten those up. Leave the fans off as they're easier to add in a little bit later. Once the cooler's on, it is case time, and I've picked up this, the Cougar Duoface Pro RGB. Now, this is not only a great value option, but it's kind of cool because it comes with 2 faces, hence the Duoface name. You get a glass panel or a mesh panel, so if you're more bothered about airflow, or you're in a hotter room, or the PC's in a less ideal place, you can put the mesh on, whereas if you want the aesthetics that the glass and the RGB provide, you can put that on too. And you get both panels included, so unlike other cases we have to go on and buy a panel and they don't ship to your country, and it costs you $20 and then they want $14, not talking from personal experience obviously, none of that rubbish, it just comes with the panel, so that's nice to see. And it's a really good value chassis. This whole build is aimed around getting the best performance possible from the 7700 XT without spending a fortune. Love the aesthetics on this case. All build quality feels pretty good, and the panel just comes off with a thumb screw, captive thumb screw, little lever, beautiful. You also get cool additions like a vertical GPU mount included, which I really like, alongside a 120mm fan at the back, and if I take the front panel off, behind this mesh, 3 RGB 120s at the front, helping of course to aid airflow. I think for this build I might actually pop the mesh panel on, just to go for a slightly different look and feel, and of course to get that slightly better airflow. In terms of installing the motherboard, you always want to lay the case down flat, as that's going to make the whole process a lot easier. The built-in rear I/O shields on boards nowadays make this thing so much easier than it was in years gone by, and all the screws you need for this step are included with your case. Once the motherboard is in and I've reattached those 2 cooler fans, I'm going to go ahead and pop the graphics card in. Now this case has got quite a cool horizontal GPU support bracket, so I'm going to unscrew that first and just move it to the bottom position so it's out the way, then take out the, looking at it, and I will double check this by adding the graphics card in. Yes, the 2nd and 3rd PCIe brackets. I can use these brackets to cover off the empty ones from the vertical mount that I used last time and install the GPU horizontally just under our quite chunky CPU cooler. Push the PCIe clip back, slide the GPU in. Oh, this is exciting. Bit of a click, lovely stuff. Couple of screws on the left to fasten it in, and then I'm also going to pop the GPU support bracket up to stop it sagging. It isn't a particularly big card, so it's not going to be a problem, but it's a useful thing to have nonetheless. The final part to pop into the build is the power supply. Now, I've gone slightly overkill, Cooler Master V750i Gold. One part of any build at the moment that seems to be just weirdly expensive is power supplies. If I'm honest, any 750 watt 80 plus bronze, silver, gold is going to be fine. This is an ATX3 unit, which you just don't need for a PC like this. I'll happily hold my hands up and say there are probably other power supplies that will save you money for this build. I'll link them below alongside everything mentioned for this system. In terms of the power cables that you do need, we need a motherboard power connector, which is the largest, not 1 GPU power connector, but 2 GPU power connectors for the graphics card. SATA power is always useful to have for powering up RGB hubs or any older SATA SSDs or hard drives. 1 8-pin CPU power cable. Let me check the motherboard. Aha, it has an auxiliary, so we could also do with an auxiliary 8-pin CPU power connector. Give me a moment, let me find that, get all these plugged in, screw the PSU into the back of the case, and wire up the CPU in the top left, motherboard on the far right, and GPU to the graphics card to get everything nicely juiced up and ready to go. And with that, my first Radeon 7700 XT build is complete. What do you guys think? If you want to take another look at performance, I'll leave our full review down below, and you can check out the graphs and gameplay earlier in this video. For now though, I'll round things off with an epic montage of how this thing looks, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.